Welcome to today's webinar in the Knowledge Miles series, part of the Lord Mayor's lectures on behalf of Professor Michael Mainelli, whose theme for his mayoral year is Connect to Prosper. In this free online lecture series, we address the connections in and around the square mile, which Michael likes to call the world's coffee house, and how these might help us to tackle future global challenges. I'm Professor Tim Connell, Chairman of the Gresham Society and a Fellow of Gresham College here in the City of London, and I'm also a liveryman of the Stationers' Company. I'll be convening this session and moderating the questions and answers after today's lecture. So this is the plan for today. Very brief introduction from me, the keynote presentation from Lady Tessa Brewer, Francesca Findlater, and then we have about 20 minutes for questions. Now today we have a really great topic, Pan Livery Legacy, from historical philanthropy to modern rehabilitation with no going back. So we're delighted to have with us Fran Findlater, Lady Tessa Brewer. Fran, perhaps you could tell us a bit more about yourself.
Yes, thank you, Jim. I've been involved in, this is relevant to me because I've been involved in prisoner rehabilitation in some shape, size or form for the last 20 years now. And having started a charity called Bounce Back about 15 years ago, I'm been delighted to have an opportunity to now start and run the No Going Back project, which is being supported by the Livery Companies. My background originally was actually in communications and corporate marketing. So it's a big step from there to dancing the corridors of prison. But I've always been very passionate about employing people from different groups. I sit on a number of creative boards, and I serve on in a number of different areas, working with charities, working in prisons, and also on transforming lives, basically. And I'm also a haberdasher. So.
Ah, splendid. And Tessa, what about yourself?
Good morning. I am also a liveryman, but of the Musicians' Company. But my route into the city and the livery was really together with my late husband, and he was the Lord Mayor a very long time ago in 2005-06. But from about the late 80s, early 90s, I was invited to join the Sheriffs and Recorders Fund at the Old Bailey by the then chair. And I've sort of been involved sometimes more avidly than others simply because the other side of life took over, but with this sector since then. And I was lucky enough to chair the Sheriffs and Recorders for a number of years. And it was while I was chairing it that I met Fran. And we did work together for the Sheriffs and Recorders. And that brought me into Pan Livery. And on goes the story.
Yes, excellent. Well, I have to declare that many years ago, I had a connection with Wormwood Scrubs, but I'm pleased to say that was in the education department and not anywhere else. So now let's all hear about No Going Back and how it is helping prisoners before and after their release.
So I will start, if I may, and good morning to all those who are listening. And I'm really grateful that you've joined us today to hear more about the Livery's contribution to charity over time. One of the areas most commonly known in livery philanthropic giving is education. Having started by training apprentices all those centuries ago, the Livery Company's endowment of schools grew and grew. Many still have strong links with schools they founded, and indeed the City of London and Livery Companies have been involved more recently with the formation of academies. Both time and money are part of the commitment. Obviously, each company has evolved its other giving in line with their area of expertise or a personal association. Almshouses, too, were founded by a good number of the companies. Another area where livery companies have contributed in a variety of ways is in their association with the armed forces. The City of London has always been at the forefront of innovation and in prison reform as much as anywhere else. In the 1420s, Richard Whittington, the prominent mercer, funded the rebuilding of Newgate Prison. Since that time, many livery companies have come together to support initiatives in this field. In 1808, the Sheriffs of the City of London founded the Sheriffs' Fund Society. This amalgamated with the Recorders Fund in 1931. Over 200 plus years, this fund has enabled individual grants to individual prisoners on release to help with the next step. As is very well known, Elizabeth Fry started her work to improve conditions for women in Newgate Prison in 1813. Now we move on to the Pan Livery. In 2016, under the energetic and committed master of the Mercers Company, Johnny Robertson, all the livery companies were invited to discuss a Pan Livery initiative over breakfast. The aim was to consider how, by working together on a philanthropic activity, a better outcome would be achieved in a particular field. It was also important to promote and highlight the work of livery companies to the wider world. There are doubting Thomases out there. In the event, and following a second meeting of 95 livery masters, the Pan Livery came into being. There was a lot of discussion about what area we should concentrate on, but in the end it was decided that rehabilitation of prisoners was the one we should opt for. However, to date, the following have also been set up. The Livery Kitchens Initiative during the pandemic, hugely successful, Pollinating London, the Climate Change Action Group, the Livery Chairs Group, and No Going Back. Today, our podcast will be concentrating on the journey that No Going Back has taken since its launch in March 2020, a rather difficult timing to say the least. From an initial engagement of 13 companies in 2020, NGB has grown to 40 livery companies participating in different ways, including, importantly, volunteering. The Pan Livery Survey of 2021 stated that philanthropic giving by livery companies to the reoffending sector had reached £1.6 million in that year alone. It should be made clear that reoffending costs us £18 billion a year. The third sector can make such a difference to people who have lost their way and to the exchequer. In the 1860s, there were around 30,000 men, women, and children in prison. In 1993, the prison population was 44,000. However, in 2024, it stands at over 86,000, of which under 4,000 are women. An extra 20,000 prison places are presently being built, and there is a target of 100,000 people in prison in the not very distant future. In an article published in 1894 entitled, "Are Our Prisons a Failure?" the Reverend William Morrison argued that, to quote, "the regime was not only failing but actually destroying prisoners' minds, making men unfit to earn an honest living." In 2024, a prison inspection of HMP Wandsworth revealed, quote, "with poor access to education and the appalling conditions in which men were held, it was unsurprising that they reoffended." The livery really does have a compelling reason to want to enable change. And at this point, Fran, I hand over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tessa. And I think the important thing, firstly, can we move the slide on? I think that would be lovely. Thank you. To keep going, actually, there's a couple more. Thank you very much. And the next one. And we can get, thank you, perfect. And really now what we're concentrating on is putting this in context, because this isn't just about a, if you like, a sales pitch for No Going Back. This is about how it fits into the context of the history and where we are now. And actually, we're not very far further forward than we were in the Victorian times. Although the hard labour machines, the penal treadmill and the hand crank have happily gone, there are several challenges as relevant now as they were in 1898, many of which Tessa's outlined. The livery have supported No Going Back to try and overcome and navigate some of those challenges and to prevent people ultimately from going back to prison. And again, just quoting then and now, going back to, well, then the prisons were full to capacity, many were still awaiting trial, and a variety of people with extremely varying convictions were held together. And now prisons have reached maximum capacity, courts are unable to catch up with the backlog of cases awaiting sentencing, and nearly 20,000 people remain on remand awaiting trial, some for up to 3 years. Then the conditions were grim, and as Tessa also pointed out, and without assistance from charities, reformers and volunteers, the situation was desperate. Today, there are now 1,700 charities in this sector, doing different things in admirable ways in a number of ways to support prisoners and prison leavers, and the prison conditions continue to deteriorate. Victorian reformers identified that prisoners deserved to be treated decently, and the purpose of prison was to punish and reform, not to kill prisoners with disease or teach them to be better criminals. Happily, we're less likely to kill them with disease now, although TB, I gather, has popped up recently. But prisoner rehabilitation is a fundamental part of the process that the charities perform, and education and employment has become a focus in getting people a new life, and that's both from the government and from the organisations in the sector. Next slide, please. And why is this relevant today? Just really focusing, and I think that because it's so dominant now, with prison construction and overcrowding being such a massive part of what the government has picked up on now, and having a new prisons minister, which is very exciting, as somebody who comes from the sector, James Timpson, I think the fact that this is still a focus, it's interesting to reflect on the fact that between 1842 and 1877, the most significant period of prison construction in UK history started or ran, costing millions of pounds, and indeed in response to the challenges of prison overcrowding. Very little has changed. 90 prisons were built or added to, and today 32 of those 19th century prisons are still in use in England and Wales, and they accommodate around a quarter of the prison population. In 2015, Chancellor George Osborne announced a new prison reform programme, saying one important step will be to modernise the prison estate. So many of our jails are relics from Victorian times on prime real estate in our inner cities. This £4 billion plan for 20,000 more prison places was due to be finished by the 2020s, but mid-2020s, but is now likely to be 2030. And in the meantime, prisons have reached an overcrowding crisis. The current government are picking up this mantle and changing planning permission, driving the building of new prisons and changing sentencing. So we look forward to huge changes and exciting changes in the near future. On her retirement as CEO of the Howard League for Penal Reform in August 2021, Frances Crook declared that if a traveller from 100 years ago walked into a prison today, the similarities would trump the differences. Next slide, please. So why did the Livery create No Going Back? In fact, it's almost self-evident when you hear what both Tessa and I have been saying. But every quarter, 12,000 people are released from prison, of which 50% will probably go back or not far off it. It costs over £40,000 a year to send one person to prison, and the Livery have worked with us to create something that costs £4,500 a year to put people through, and that's a course from No Going Back. Individuals leave prison with £76, and that leaves them little incentive not to reoffend. And there is a huge untapped pool of talent in prisons, entrepreneurial and determined, whose transferable skills lend themselves well to successful careers. When given an opportunity and supported on release, they can be the most loyal workforce. And as Tessa has said, and we all keep reiterating, it's costing us all a fortune, and £18 billion is not to be sniffed at. And what stops people going back to prison? Next slide, please. Thank you. Well, one of the key things, I think the things that really matter always have mattered. Somewhere to live, someone to care, and something to do, and that's education, skills, and a job. And when Elizabeth Fry started to respect women in prison, she started to show that people in prison matter. And I think one of the most important things that we do that helps to stop people going back to prison, apart from giving them a job, is that we also want to change people's perception. For the inmates who believe no one cares, and the public who don't understand that in many cases these are people who quite simply never had a chance. That doesn't mean for 1 minute that there are not people who should be in prison, but for the ones who are ready to change, the right. We believe very firmly that they should be given a second chance and the help that is needed to achieve that. And the more we can do to help people get jobs and stop them going back to prison and committing crimes, the safer we can make our communities, and the more we can try to reduce the number of victims. Next slide, please. So what is it, this thing, No Going Back, that we've been talking about? So it's a charity. It's 170 livery volunteers. It's also a social enterprise that employs people leaving prison, and it supports individuals from prison to the next stage in their lives. Plus, it helps people get employment. So it does a number of the things that we've just talked about. And just going into those in a bit more detail. Next slide, please. The first one is education, and the opportunity to have education in prisons and out is a massive part of the whole programme for everybody in the sector. And the fact that we work very closely with City and Guilds is steeped in the same historic relevance. In 1878, when the City of London Corporation and 16 livery companies established the City and Guilds Institute in recognition of the need for quality training following the Industrial Revolution. A registered charity, it received its Royal Charter in 1900. And the relationship between City and Guilds and No Going Back is invaluable. And it continues the strong links with the livery companies in many ways, including in its current council members. And they have been a huge support and a great driver with the education in No Going Back. We've been able to add what we offer to assess individuals and also to work with them on the things that are so relevant for everyone, not just people in prison: mental health, anxiety, neurodiversity. All of these things we work with City and Guilds to try and overcome and to try and challenge and change some of the issues that occur both in and out of prison. Next slide, please. And what else works? Well, volunteering. We're all mentioning volunteering like mad, but actually it has been quite amazing. 170 volunteers have absolutely, the effect of whom have been transformative. And it has come in many ways, and it is a true demonstration of how the livery have genuinely all tipped in to actually work together. The actuaries are developing a money management course in prisons and doing other things with us as well. The entrepreneurs have supported business initiatives and self-employment. The haberdashers volunteer. There are loads of haberdashers volunteers, I have to say, but one of the haberdashers volunteers helped one of our candidates win the FT Dragon's Den Challenge and get £1,000 to start their business. The merchant tailors have introduced JP Morgan to be involved, and over 30 people from JP Morgan are now working with us. Ironmongers, mercers, builders, merchants, horners, and many, many more have supported us. And when I say support, it's not just about money, and in fact it's very far from being about money. It's about volunteering, but it's also about providing us with jobs. A number of the skills that we're training in, we get through, we also get put in touch with a number of employers through the livery, and that's been, all the way from the beginning, has been incredibly valuable. Next slide, please. And what works as well is jobs. And as we've said all the way through, that again, that reoffending is reduced by 50% if someone gets a job. And in this area, the Worshipful Company of Environmental Cleaners stepped in and supported the starting of NGB Clean, our own cleaning and support services social enterprise that employs people from prison. It also mentors and guides people to set up their own businesses, and all supported by the Worshipful Company, but also other livery companies as well. And in addition, the charity and the social enterprise work with a variety of employers in other areas to get people into work and good careers. We're not just talking about that. So we have a fantastic team of cleaners, but we also have careers in executive levels in facilities management, cleaning, and more, with opportunities for progression, because those things are incredibly important. People can't just come out of prison and think they've got to stay at one level, and they will continue. And the government has announced yet again today, which is incredibly helpful, that in order to stop reoffending, employ people. And they want more and more people to understand that if we all work together to change people's perception so that they can come into prisons, they meet people in prisons, then you start to make a difference. And that's when people stop reoffending, which helps us all. Next slide, please. So in summary, the whole process is about collaboration. No going back is about collaboration from the start to the finish. And that's, you know, when the Victorians prison reformers worked together, a much smaller group of people to make a difference in prisons. Now all the organisations working in the sector, with some amazing networking organisations that put people together to try to work together and support more and more prisoners. But even greater has been the impact of the Livery working together to help us to succeed, not just with money, as I've said, but also we have a steering group now where we actually get advice and genuine ongoing guidance. So they have followed this from the beginning and join us on our monthly updates and sagas about the prison system, some of which make their toes curl. And they get a chance to meet the people that we work with. And so a part of that is that we have a series of ambassadors who work with us and go out and spread the word, and also are supporting a number of different initiatives. And our ambition is to work with more people. The more organisations, the more livery companies, and the number of partners we can acquire make us more successful. And we value people in joining us on the journey. You might like, for example, to change perception or reduce reoffending and help us realise the ambition of the 40 livery companies that have already been involved and have supported it for 4 years. Interestingly, every time we used to say we were supported by the livery, a brief history lesson had to ensue to explain who they were, particularly in prisons when we were very much announced as a livery initiative, which was quite an amusing place to start announcing it. However, less so now, and more prisoners, prison staff, more and more employers, and a number of different areas for the people that we reach and the people that we meet understand what the livery is. So I'm delighted to say that the history lesson has got slightly less, particularly as I'm probably not the best person to be explaining it. But it has made a huge difference to the impact or the understanding of what the livery is about. And being a part of it has been hugely valued by the prisoners and the prisons and our partners. Next slide, please. So does it work? Yes, it does. We're relieved to say, or I don't think we'd be sitting here today. It has, for every pound that's been spent, we have £12.64 of social value. But more to the point, we've worked with over 2,000 people in some shape, size or form, and we're independently evaluated. So since day one, we've made sure that the evaluation has been external and that we can always measure our impact in detail. And that's guided through, in fact, supported by City and Guilds as well, to actually help us and enable us to get the impact measurement with an organisation called Bean Research, who've been fantastic. And that's provided, and so over that period of time, we've got over 300 people into employment. We've had a number of job offers, and many people can't take the job offers, or they're not suitable because they are in different parts of the country or different parts of the city, and there are various reasons for not being able to reach them. We've supported over 2,000 people. When I say over 2,000, it's in some way, and they have heard about us and know about us. And ultimately, we've achieved a reoffending rate of 3% against the published figures of over 50%. So in the end, we're very proud of the success, and proud of the success that the livery have had by supporting the whole programme. And then finally, next slide, please. I think these two quotes sort of sum it up, really. James Timpson, the new Prisons Minister, did not mince words when he basically said, if you treat people well, it's blindingly obvious that they will do a good job. Similarly, the degree of civilization in society can be judged by entering the prisons, which Dostoevsky said a long time ago. And so thank you all for listening. There is that we are very open to questions, and I hope that gives you a very rough idea of where we come from.
Well, thank you very much indeed, both of you. Absolutely fascinating. And as always, there's this matter of the oxygen of publicity, as someone once called it. It is a very, very interesting scheme, seems to be very, very successful, draws in large numbers of people and organisations, and I do hope it will become better known. Now, we do have some interesting questions coming up, one or two of which might be considered controversial. Question from Charles Vermont, distinguished member of the Gresham Society. Do you think drugs should be decriminalised in order to take pressure off the prison system?
A great start. Thank you, Charles, for that.
Nice, easy one.
Yeah, thank you. Possibly a longer answer than I can come up with. I certainly think there is an argument to relook at the way we have criminalised drugs, and it would certainly make a huge difference, as has been proved in a number of different countries. And it's certainly something that doesn't seem to get the attention and the review that it should. My personal view, certain drugs, in my view, should be decriminalised, yes. And I think it would make an enormous difference.
Well, a question here from Matthew Leach. If a person is struggling to find work, but has not actually committed a crime serious enough for imprisonment, are you able to help them too, or do they have to commit a crime in order to qualify for help? And who might they be able to turn to?
Well, we'd be delighted to welcome them to have a chat with them anyway. That you certainly don't have to have committed a crime to have it. You don't have to have been to prison. You may have committed a crime, but you don't have to have been to prison. And we're always very happy. If it's not something that we can deal with, we always refer people to other organisations. So certainly, if somebody is in that position and wants to find a job, we can help.
That leads to an interesting question. You mentioned that there were 1,700 charities involved in some way in the prison system. Is there an element of duplication here, or is there a way in which they can be streamlined to be more effective?
Yes, that's an extremely good question, Tim. That is a long-standing conversation that goes on. I think almost with every charity, with all charities in all sectors, I think we can agree that there are an enormous number of charities doing very similar things. I would say in our sector that there are some fantastic charities doing slightly different things, or things in their own ways, in slightly different ways. I personally think there is a massive opportunity to join charities up, but the challenge will always be that different charities it is all around the funding, around the methodology, and around the individuals that sometimes make that quite difficult. And Tessa, I don't know if you have a view on that.
No, I agree that the more that we can work together on parallel lines, the better it is for everybody. But you often have the case, and particularly in this world, where people have set things up because they've suffered something themselves, then that becomes a very personally driven vision to compensate for loss in some ways. I think that because the 1,700 charities have an overarching body called clinks, not to be confused with the clink, there is this wonderful opportunity for dialogue. And I think that one of the things going back that we have tried to do from the start is to engage with others. And we do work, Fran, don't we, with other partners who can provide something where they're more specialist in a particular need than we are. So yes, there's more room for that in the future, but little steps bring forward bigger steps.
Yes, and you mentioned they're very, very important, the number of volunteers and the kind of impact that they can bring, either as individuals or bringing their organisation in with them. That's a very important point. Now, Shane Brinian, another key issue in this area, how do we reduce the stigma that employees may feel towards people who are leaving the prison system? Do you find this is a problem, an obstacle?
Well, I think that a lot of what we're trying to do, and I think when I mentioned that we're trying to change perception, it's hugely important. One of the ways we do this is a number of our employers, for example, come into prisons with us and meet and interview people in prison itself. So that starts the process of people understanding that that people in prison are not ogres, for lack of a better way of putting it. I think that the rest of the work, working with a number of a lot of employers are now working with a number of different organisations who are working very hard to change individual perception and organisational perception. It doesn't inevitably happen overnight, and it's still a challenge. There is certainly a percentage of employers who will not take people with a criminal record, but also when they understand, there's a lot of it's very easy to start changing people's policies and some of the attitudes of individuals within prison. It's not very easy actually, but it is possible, and we work quite hard to do that, to work with people to actually change the way that companies look and review their criminal records and their DBS checking. And there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes on that. Tessa, do you have?
No, I think that Fran is in prison almost every day. I don't go to prison very often, but from my standpoint, I think it goes back to sort of what I touched on, that there are, really very bad people that have done horrendous things. But the large majority or the huge majority of people that you come across have never been given a chance. That, if they've fallen in, they've made a bad decision, they've fallen into a bad group of people, and then they commit a crime, and then the rest of their life is sort of trying to pay it off. And these people are very often damaged. So I think, Fran, when you're talking about taking employers into prison, I think sometimes that's when people begin to see, yes, like James Timpson did with Timpsons, there is a lot of potential here. We've just got to bring it out of them, etc. And he seems to know instantly when he goes into prison the people that he can employ. I mean, it's quite an interesting way that he does things. So I think that if you haven't encountered a prisoner and you read all the horrific stuff online or in the paper or whatever it is, your immediate idea is it's very negative. I just think it's just desperately sad when you see the majority of them. So, and there is this huge potential that we need to engage with. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what I feel.
Yes, no, it reminds me of a magistrate of my acquaintance with many years on the bench who said that most of the people who came before her were perfectly ordinary people who'd done something rather silly. And I think there's a separate category, as we're hearing at the moment with this awful triple murder, that there are people who really have to be locked up for everybody's safety. But that doesn't seem to be the case for a very large number of prisoners concerned. Now, here's an important one for the two of you. James Dalton is a trustee of the Plumbers Charity from the Worshipful Company of Plumbers, and he says they've supported No Going Back over the last few years, but finding it hard to know who to contact to make our donation, which they have earmarked. So if either of you or both of you would like to earwig James Dalton as soon as possible, you might get some good news.
That would be fantastic. Thank you, James. And in fact, we've even got a young plumber now, so I would really be delighted to contact you.
Yes, and also he's also asking, I can answer this one, could we let him know whether the slides from today will be made available so he can share them across his livery company? Well, of course, all of our lectures do go up in the Knowledge Miles Net scheme. They are up on YouTube, and they're also available through the Gresham Society website. So I trust, Fran and Tessa, that we can use your slides.
Absolutely.
Yep, splendid. Now, oh dear, another one from Charles Lamont. In your opinion, what proportion of the prison population is not able to be rehabilitated? Is there a figure that anybody can work to?
That's an interesting one. I think again, the challenge is that I remember once going into prison with Rory Stewart was in prison with us, and he said, "I'm not concerned about the 30% that will be able to get jobs and that will be able to continue with their lives." He said, what I am concerned with and what my focus is on are the 30% who will not be able to do that because they have issues that are beyond just going out and getting a job. So there's mental health issues, there are challenges with people from care, there are challenges from in a number of different areas. So not everyone is ready to continue their lives. And I think that you would say that what percentage? I don't know the actual government figures, but when I go into a prison, you always say that 30% of the people in that prison, so say there's 1,000 people in a prison, and subject, of course, to what the level of the prison is. But if I'm going into C and D category, which are the prisons for people who are leaving, you would always say that 30% of them will be easier to get into work. There will be a band who we can support to train and get there, but there will undoubtedly be a percentage who can't, who will have different struggles and that will need to work in different ways with other organisations to go and for the rest of their journey. So I can't say the exact figure, but there is certainly a level of people who probably should not be in prison in the first place, and who will find it much harder to move forward. Tessa, do you have a...
Yes, Tessa, do you have a...
I so agree with what Fran said. There's so many people that are in the wrong place. It's easier to lock them up than to deal with them outside with the issues that they have. They should not be in prison. I feel quite strongly about that.
Yes. No, curiously enough, my recollection with Wormwood Scrubs was even quite a lot of the prisoners were saying some of the other prisoners really should not have been in prison, not because that they were innocent, but because they really had, in particular, mental issues, which of course are not being treated as well as they might have been, given that they were at the time in D Wing at the Scrubs, which was not a nice place at all at the time. No. That leads on again to Charles, whether do prisoners have good access to psychotherapy? Can you tell us?
Yes, it is provided in prisons. There are health schemes. They vary, of course, in the different prisons, and but effectively there are solutions of different levels to support people with different mental challenges. For example, Pentonville is a really good example. It's not quite the same, but they have a neurodiversity wing. So the whole wing is devoted to people with neurodiversity, and it's a fantastic place to see. And the awareness since COVID particularly on the mental health challenges that have arisen with individuals, and this does not just apply to prisons, this applies, as we all know, in our communities, has raised the bar in terms of what provision there is in prisons for supporting people with mental health issues. So yes, there are different levels in different prisons, and everything always comes down to the way the different regimes work and the different processes. But definitely there is more awareness and more support.
You mentioned Pentonville, and of course London has a large number of prisons which are either famous or notorious. The Scrubs, Brixton, Wandsworth, Belmarsh, etc. Is No Going Back focused in particular on London, or do you have a wider reach?
It's focused on London because it's supported by the Livery. So the Livery at this stage, although there are opportunities to go out of London, and some partner organisations that we've linked with in Birmingham and various other parts of England, but predominantly it is a London-centric programme. So we work in 5 London prisons. So we go into Wormwood Scrubs and Wandsworth and Brixton and Thameside and ISIS, and also we work sometimes with the prisons outside London who actually release people into London. So our focus tends to be on London at the moment.
Yes. Tessa, I wonder perhaps if you could give us a bit more information about the Sheriffs and Recorders Fund. I believe you were chairman for some years, so you should have an inside knowledge of it. Can you tell us more about what it is, and for our viewers, its connection with the Old Bailey? How does that actually work?
So it was actually started, it was one of the first charities to help prisoners, and it was started by 2 enlightened sheriffs in 1808. And only in the 1930s did it join up with the recorder, who had his own separate fund. So it's always been housed in the Old Bailey and is worked very closely with probation. It should be, just for interest, when these 2 sheriffs started in 1808, the Livery came in as always to help, but they really needed much greater funds. So they got the then Duke of Cambridge to host a dinner, or he was hosted at a dinner at Mansion House, where they raised enormous sums of money to really give it a boost, to go to the next level. And over the years, it has, for the probation service, probation's had its ups and downs, but it has been with the probation giving needs. So I always tell the story of one lady that wrote in, this was in the 90s, I think, and she said, I'm a single mother, my husband is in prison. I've got 3 young children, and I have to get a job where I can earn more money. And I'm doing whatever studies it was, and I have to do it when I come in from my day job in the evening. Please, would you buy us a television so my children would be quiet when I'm writing my essay? So we did, and she succeeded. So something very small can actually transform somebody's life. They then took it on to doing projects, which is how I then met Fran, because there was a lovely, the first lady judge at the Old Bailey, who was called Anne, oh God, when she died, she left us a legacy, and it was a very generous legacy to help younger people in London. And so we started doing projects, and then I met Fran, and we started doing this project of rehabilitation on release and the the wraparound service, and it started to work. And that actually was the prototype for what No Going Back then became. But it goes on to do incredible. Wendy Joseph, who was another lady judge at the Old Bailey, she's written a book. She's given all the proceeds. So the sheriffs and recorders are running a literacy program, because illiteracy is huge in prisons. So it does incredibly good work, and the livery companies have been constant in their support and continue to be. And they also do now, under the excellent chairmanship of Hilary Russell, wife of Sir William Russell, they do really interesting fundraising events. So people are keen to go to the Bailey and engage with them. And the recorder is very much part of the trusteeship, et cetera, et cetera. So it does invaluable work, which is very different to what we are now doing with No Going Back. But it is still in basically the individual prisoner on release, helping them to have more than 76 quid with the need.
Well, that's very, very interesting. But since we're talking about money, one vital question which we haven't heard about: if anybody wished to donate either to No Going Back or to the Sheriffs and Recorders Funds, could you tell us perhaps how they actually may do so? And equally, if anybody wished to volunteer for No Going Back, can you give us some idea as to who they might contact?
Fran?
Yes, absolutely. In terms of No Going Back, we have a website which actually does say, I thought, more than it obviously does for the plumbers. So I think it could be right. It's not as clear as it should be. But we do have a website which is confusing, because it's nogoingback.uk instead of .com or .co.uk. And we also, it's very easy to find us in some shapes, I thought. In some shape, size, or form. So we try and make it as easy as possible, but maybe not. But I would be very glad if our details could be distributed, perhaps, if people request the slides and if they request any further information.
Yes, indeed. When our lectures go up, and in fact, that's just flashed up. The URL is on the screen for people. But yes, we will add that to the slides when it goes out for public use. Now,
the Sheriff's Recorders, just so you know, they also have a website which is sr-fund.org, and you can also look them up. If you do Sheriff's Recorders, it comes up, and you can do it with one of these things, which I would never know how to do, or whatever you want, and they would be very happy to hear from you.
Splendid. Right, now let's just have a brief look at some of the forthcoming lectures in the Lord Mayor's lecture series. Hopefully about to come up. Yes, here we are. So next week, well, there we are. We mentioned neurodiversity. Well, next week, that's neurodiversity in insurance and investment. Insotech on the 22nd of July, transforming insurance innovation. And then back to our legal beagles on the 23rd of July, London dispute resolution, new goals for the leading city. So there's plenty there. We cover a very wide range of topics, actually, if you care to go onto the website and have a look. So, as I said, all our lectures are recorded, posted on the Gresham Society website and on our YouTube channel, in case you want to revisit anything. And, of course, finally, thank you very much indeed to Fran Findlater and Lady Tessa Brewer. We're very grateful for a wide-ranging webinar on such a key topic, and hopefully this will help ex-prisoners and reduce the pressure on prisons today. Thank you everyone for watching, and don't forget the Lord Mayor's theme for the year, which of course is Connect to Prosper. Thank you and goodbye. Goodbye.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you very much.